You have never once, in your entire life, heard true silence. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of midnight. I mean the silence inside your own skull, the one place you have never actually visited. Because the moment you close your eyes, something starts talking. A thought, a worry, a memory dressed up as a plan. And you call this normal. You call this thinking. But what if the mind that never stops talking is not a sharp mind? What if it's an exhausted one, running because it has forgotten how to stand still? That's the paradox we're sitting with today. The mind you think is working hard for you might actually be the same mind that's slowly wearing you down. And the strange part is, you won't fix it by adding anything. Not a new habit, not a new app, not another piece of advice. You fix it by taking something away. This video is about that missing piece. Not motivation, not productivity, silence. The specific, deliberate, uncomfortable kind that your subconscious has been begging for while your conscious mind kept scrolling past it. We're going to look at why your brain feels loud even when your life looks calm, why rest doesn't mean what you think it means, and what happens underneath the surface when you finally let your mind stop performing. Here's the problem, and you already know it, even if you've never said it out loud. You wake up already tired, not physically, mentally, like your mind ran laps all night while your body just lay there. You check your phone before your eyes are even fully open, and by the time you're brushing your teeth, you've already consumed more information than someone from 100 years ago would take in over a week. And it doesn't stop. Music in the car, a podcast while you cook, a show while you eat, notifications while you work. You are never, not once, alone with your own mind. And somewhere, in all that noise, something quiet in you has been trying to get your attention, and it keeps getting drowned out. You call it a full life, but your subconscious calls it an assault. It's not broken, it's buried. The mind that never gets to finish a thought. Think about the last time you actually finished a thought, start to end. No interruption, no phone glance, no jump to the next tab. Take a real second and try to remember it. Not a thought about what to cook, not a passing thought about traffic, but a real thought, one that had a beginning and an ending, one you sat with long enough to watch it unfold on its own terms. You probably can't remember, and the fact that you can't remember is not a small thing. It's actually one of the strangest, quietest tragedies of the way we live now, and almost nobody talks about it because it doesn't look like a tragedy from the outside. It looks like a normal Tuesday. Here's what happens instead. You're standing in the kitchen and a thought starts to rise. Maybe it's about something someone said to you last week that never sat right. Maybe it's about a decision you've been avoiding. Maybe it's just a feeling, with no name yet, still forming. And right as it starts to take shape, your hand is already moving toward your phone. Not because you decided to check it, not because there was an emergency, just because that's the groove your body has worn into itself. The thought gets interrupted mid-sentence, so to speak, and something louder and shinier takes its place. You look at a message, you scroll for 11 seconds, you put the phone down, and the thought that was rising is gone. Not answered, not resolved, just gone. The way a wave pulls back into the ocean before it ever reaches the shore. This happens constantly. It happens so often that most people don't even register it as an event anymore. It's just the texture of an ordinary day. A thought rises, gets 15% of the way to being understood, and then gets cut off by a notification, a craving, a habit, an itch to be somewhere else mentally. And your subconscious, because it doesn't work the way your conscious mind works, it doesn't just shrug and move on, takes that unfinished thought and it files it away. Somewhere, not gone, not deleted, not resolved, filed away, the way an open tab stays open, even when you're not looking at it, quietly using up energy in the background, even though your attention has moved somewhere else entirely. Now stretch that out, not one unfinished thought, but 200 a day, not one day, but every day, for years. Some of those thoughts were small, passing irritations, tiny observations, half-formed opinions that never got to fully form. But some of them were not small at all. Some of them were about people you love and things you haven't said to them. Some of them were about a version of your life you keep almost imagining and then abandoning before the picture gets clear. Some of them were grief that never got its moment, because the moment it tried to rise, you reached for something else instead, not even consciously, just automatically, the way you'd flinch away from something hot. Multiply that by years, and you start to understand why so many people walk around feeling like they're carrying something they can't name. It's not one big thing, it's thousands of small, unfinished things, stacked on top of each other in a place you don't usually visit, adding weight the way sediment adds weight to a riverbed, slowly, invisibly, one thin layer at a time, until one day the water doesn't move the way it used to, and you don't know why. This is what people mean, in a way, when they say they feel foggy, or heavy, or like something in them is tired, even though they haven't done anything physically demanding. It's not always exhaustion from effort. Sometimes it's the weight of everything that never got to finish. A mind that never gets to complete a single thought all the way through is a mind that's constantly accumulating unfinished business. And unfinished business, whether it's an email or a memory or a feeling, has a way of humming in the background whether you're paying attention to it or not. Think about what it would actually mean to let a thought finish. Not force it, not analyze it to death. Just let it run its full course, the way you'd let a piece of music play, instead of skipping to the next track after 4 seconds. What would happen if, standing in that kitchen, you let the thought about what your friend said last week actually rise all the way up? Maybe it would lead you somewhere uncomfortable. Maybe it would show you that you're more hurt than you realized, or more scared, or that you already know what you need to do and you've just been avoiding knowing it. That's exactly why the phone is there, waiting, so convenient, so ready to interrupt before you get there. The interruption isn't random. It's not an accident that the world builds so many exits for your attention right at the exact moment your mind starts to go somewhere real. It works because it works. Because most people, most of the time, would rather feel the small itch of a notification than the larger discomfort of an unfinished thought clawing its way toward completion. So the exit gets taken, again and again, thousands of times, until taking the exit becomes the default, and finishing a thought becomes the exception. But here's the part worth sitting with. Those thoughts don't need you to solve them. They don't need a 5-step plan or a life-changing decision on the spot. Most of the time, they just need to be let alone long enough to finish existing. A thought that gets to run its full course, uninterrupted, tends to resolve itself the way a wave that's allowed to reach the shore simply settles back into the water without needing anything else from you. It's the interruption that keeps it alive, unfinished, circling back later in a slightly different shape, showing up as a strange mood, or a tightness in your chest, or an irritation that seems to come from nowhere. This is why silence feels strange at first, when you finally sit in it. All those unfinished thoughts, all those filed away moments, they don't wait politely for permission. The second the noise drops, they start rising, one after another, like people who've been waiting outside a door, finally getting let in. It can feel like too much. It can feel like your mind is too loud, and that's exactly the moment people give up on stillness and go running back to the noise, thinking silence made things worse, when really, It just revealed what was already there the whole time, buried under sound. The mind that never gets to finish a thought isn't broken, it isn't defective, it's just overloaded, carrying an amount of unresolved material that would overwhelm anyone if it all showed up in a single sitting. Which is exactly why this isn't about forcing a marathon session of deep reflection. It's about starting to give your mind small windows, even just a few minutes, where a thought is allowed to actually finish. Where you don't reach for the phone the second something rises. Where you let the wave travel all the way to the shore, just once, and see what it was actually trying to tell you the whole time. Dopamine was never meant to run on a loop. Your brain gives you a small hit of dopamine when something new happens. A message lighting up your screen, a like appearing under something you posted, a plot twist in a show, a joke that lands, a stranger's opinion agreeing with yours. It's such a small feeling that you barely notice it as a feeling at all. It just registers as "that was nice, I'll take another." And that's exactly the design. Dopamine isn't really about pleasure the way people assume. It's about wanting. It's the chemical that makes you reach for more, not the one that tells you you're satisfied. Satisfaction is a different system entirely, a slower, quieter one. And it's the one modern life has almost completely stopped feeding. Here's the part that matters. This system, the one that rewards you for new and unexpected things, was built for a world where new and unexpected things were rare. Somewhere, deep in your biology, there's a version of you that lived in a world where finding a new source of food was a genuinely big deal, where a change in the weather pattern actually mattered for survival, where a stranger's face was a rare enough event to deserve a jolt of attention. In that world, the occasional hit of dopamine was a useful signal. It meant, pay attention, this matters, remember this. It was tied to real information about a slower moving world. Now, new things happen every 4 seconds if you let them. A feed doesn't just show you something new. It shows you something new every time you move your thumb, on purpose, engineered that way by people whose entire job is figuring out how to make that 4-second gap even shorter. Every scroll is a tiny lottery ticket. You don't know what's coming next, and that unpredictability is exactly what makes it addictive, because your brain evolved to pay extra attention to things it can't predict. The system that was built to flag rare, important events is now being triggered constantly by things that mostly don't matter at all. Your subconscious isn't built for that pace. It doesn't have a setting for constant novelty. It has a setting for occasional novelty, mostly stability. And when you flood it with the former, something in the wiring starts to bend. The baseline shifts. What used to feel calm now feels boring. What used to feel like enough now feels like waiting for something to happen. And this is where the real damage shows up, quietly, without announcing itself. Stillness itself starts to feel like a threat. Sit somewhere with nothing happening, no phone, no screen, no sound, and pay attention to what your body does. For a lot of people, within a minute or two, there's a kind of restlessness that shows up, almost like static under the skin. It's not because something is wrong with you. It's because your nervous system has been trained, through years of constant small hits, to associate a lack of stimulation with something being off. Silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling like withdrawal, because in a very real sense, that's exactly what it is. Your brain has been running on a certain frequency of novelty for so long that the absence of it registers as a kind of hunger. This is why so many people describe boredom now as almost unbearable, when boredom used to just be a normal, forgettable part of being alive. Waiting in line used to just mean waiting. Now it means an automatic reach for the phone before the waiting even has a chance to be felt. A quiet evening used to just mean a quiet evening. Now it means something to fill, a show to have on in the background, a scroll to make time move faster. The tolerance for empty space has been worn down, not because people are weaker than they used to be, but because the environment has changed so completely, and the environment always wins if you're not paying attention to it. Here's the important thing to understand though. This isn't a character flaw. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system doing exactly what you trained it to do, responding rationally to years of consistent input. If you fed a plant nothing but sugar water for years, you wouldn't call the plant broken when it struggled to grow in normal soil. You'd understand that it adapted to what it was given, and it would need time and patience to adjust to something different. Your subconscious is doing the same thing. It adapted, the way anything alive adapts to its conditions. That means it's not a life sentence. It means it can be untrained, the exact same way it was trained, slowly, through repetition, through consistent small experiences that teach it something different. The problem is that untraining it feels bad before it feels good, which is exactly why most people quit before anything shifts. The first few times you sit in silence on purpose, it's not going to feel peaceful. It's going to feel like an itch you can't scratch, a low hum of something should be happening right now. That's not proof that silence doesn't work for you. That's the exact symptom this whole thing is trying to describe. It's the loop asking to be fed one more time, the way any habit protests when you stop giving it what it's used to getting. What actually happens, if you stay with it, is that the loop starts to loosen its grip in small increments. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the way any adaptation happens, quietly, beneath the surface, showing up as small differences you almost don't notice until you look back and realize a quiet room doesn't feel unbearable anymore. That a wait without a phone in your hand doesn't spike the same restlessness it used to. That a plain, uneventful afternoon can pass without needing to be filled with something new every few minutes. None of this means novelty is the enemy, or that a laugh from a good video or a message from someone you care about is somehow bad for you. The problem was never that dopamine exists. The problem is the loop, the constant, uninterrupted stream of small hits, with no space between them, no plain moments left for the system to reset. A rare treat and a constant diet are two completely different relationships with the same chemical. Dopamine was never meant to run on a loop with no gaps. It was meant to spike occasionally, mark something as worth remembering, and then settle back down into a baseline of ordinary, unremarkable calm. The kind of calm most people haven't felt in so long, they've forgotten it's even available to them. The difference between sleep and rest. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up more tired than when you lay down. Most people have experienced this at some point, and most people brush right past it without asking the obvious question, how is that even possible? You did the thing you were supposed to do. You closed your eyes, your body went through its cycles, the clock ran its full 8 hours, and yet somehow you open your eyes and the tiredness is still there, sometimes even heavier than it was the night before. If sleep were the whole answer, this shouldn't happen, but it happens constantly, to almost everyone, and the reason is simpler than it seems, and also more overlooked than it should be. Sleep is not the same thing as rest. Sleep is a biological process. It's your body doing maintenance, repairing tissue, consolidating memory, running through cycles that keep the machinery of you functioning. It's necessary, and it's not something you can skip, but it operates almost entirely below the level of anything you'd call awareness. You don't experience sleep. You experience the absence of experience, and then you wake up on the other side of it. It's automatic. It happens whether or not your mind was at peace before you closed your eyes. Rest is a completely different thing, and it's the thing almost nobody actually gets anymore. Rest is what your subconscious needs, not a biological process that happens to you, but a stretch of time, while you're awake and aware, where nothing is being fed to it and nothing is being asked of it. No input, no stimulation, no task, no scroll, no background noise, no problem to solve, not even a pleasant distraction. Just space, empty, unstructured, undemanding space, where your mind is allowed to simply exist without being pointed at anything. Here's why that matters so much. Your subconscious, all day, every day, is absorbing an almost unbelievable amount of information, conversations, images, sounds, tiny social cues, every notification, every headline you half read, every passing worry. All of that gets taken in, and normally, if you gave your mind the chance, it would process it, sort it, work through what mattered, and let go of what didn't. But that processing needs conditions. It needs quiet. It needs you to stop feeding in new material long enough for the backlog to actually get worked through. Without that space, the backlog just keeps growing, unprocessed, day after day, and your mind carries it straight into sleep with you, unresolved. This is part of why sleep can feel so unrefreshing, even when it technically worked. Your body did its maintenance, but your subconscious went into that maintenance already overloaded, carrying a full day's worth of unprocessed noise with nowhere to put it. Some of that shows up as restless, chaotic dreaming. Some of it just sits there, quietly, adding to the pile that was already building up from the day before, and the day before that. You wake up, and your body is rested, technically, but the deeper layer, the one that actually needed a break from being constantly fed information, never got the space it needed, so it wakes up exactly where it left off. Still full, still humming, still tired, in a way sleep alone can't touch. Most people haven't given their mind that kind of rest in years, maybe ever, and it's worth sitting with how strange that actually is. From the moment most people wake up, there's sound. Sound while getting ready, sound in the car, sound at work, sound while cooking, sound while eating, sound while falling asleep. Even the in-between moments, waiting for a coffee, walking somewhere, standing in a line, those tiny natural pauses that used to be the closest thing to rest people got throughout an ordinary day, are almost universally filled now, automatically, with a phone. There's no gap left. There's no unstructured minute where the mind is simply left alone with itself. Every possible opening gets closed before it can even become an opening. They've been sleeping their whole lives while their subconscious has been quietly, patiently starving for silence. And that sentence is worth reading twice because it captures something people rarely put into words. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It just accumulates, silently, in the background, the exact same way any deficiency does. You don't notice the absence of something until the weight of not having it becomes too obvious to ignore anymore. And by then, it doesn't look like, I need rest. It looks like fog. It looks like irritability that seems to come from nowhere. It looks like feeling tired all the time, despite technically sleeping enough hours. It looks like a strange flatness, a sense that nothing feels quite as vivid or as enjoyable as it used to. The fix isn't more sleep. That's the trap people fall into, thinking if 8 hours didn't work, 10 will. But you can't sleep your way out of a rest deficit, because sleep and rest live in different rooms of the same house. What's actually needed is much smaller and much stranger to most people than get more sleep. It's deliberately empty time, awake, with nothing coming in. No podcast to make the drive feel productive. No show playing in the background while you eat. No scrolling while you wait. Just you, and whatever's left when nothing else is competing for your attention. This is uncomfortable at first, almost universally, because a mind that's used to constant input doesn't know what to do with a gap. It reaches for something to fill it out of habit, not because it truly needs to. But if the gap is allowed to stay open, even just for a few minutes at a time, something starts to shift underneath. The backlog gets a little space to move. The unprocessed noise from the day gets a chance to actually settle, instead of getting shoved further down to make room for tomorrow's noise. And slowly, in a way that's hard to notice happening, but impossible to ignore once it's there, sleep starts to actually do what it was always meant to do. Because for the first time in a long time, it's not trying to repair a mind that never got a real moment of rest while it was still awake. Why silence feels like danger at first. Sit in a quiet room with no phone for 10 minutes and watch what happens. Not what you think will happen, not what you hope will happen. Actually watch it, the way you'd watch weather roll in, just observing without trying to control it. For most people, within the first 60 seconds, something starts to stir. Not a big dramatic feeling, just a low static, a restlessness that doesn't have a clear name. And then, right on schedule, your mind will scramble to fill the gap. It will hand you a task to worry about, something that suddenly feels urgent, even though it wasn't urgent 5 minutes ago. It will hand you a memory to replay, some conversation from last week that your mind decides needs re-examining right now, for no obvious reason. It will hand you an itch to check your phone, just for a second, a phrase that has convinced more people to abandon silence than almost anything else, because it always sounds so reasonable in the moment. This can feel, from the inside, like proof that something is wrong with you. Like you're bad at being still. Like other people can sit quietly and you can't. Like your mind is simply too restless or too broken for something as basic as 10 empty minutes. But that's not what's happening, and it's worth being very clear about this, because the misunderstanding here is exactly what keeps people running from the one thing that could actually help them. This isn't your mind malfunctioning. It's your mind protecting you from something it thinks is unsafe. Your mind doesn't distinguish between danger and discomfort as cleanly as you'd expect. If something feels uncomfortable, especially something unfamiliar, your mind treats it with the same suspicion it would treat an actual threat. And silence, real, unfilled, undistracted silence, is deeply unfamiliar to a mind that has spent years, maybe your entire adult life, surrounded by constant input. So when the noise drops away and the room goes quiet, your mind reads that absence the way it might read an unexpected silence in nature, as a signal that something is off, that it should be alert, that it should find something, anything, to focus on instead of sitting in the unknown. But here's the deeper layer, the part that explains why this reaction is so strong and so consistent across almost everyone who tries it. The quiet isn't actually empty. It only looks empty from the outside. What's actually there, waiting just beneath the surface, is the empty space where all those unfinished thoughts finally have room to surface. All the things you've been outrunning without even realizing you were running. The worry you never let yourself fully worry about. The grief you scheduled for later and later never came. The decision you've been dodging by staying busy enough that you never had to sit still long enough to make it. All of it has been waiting there, patiently, and the second the noise stops, it senses the opening and starts moving toward the surface. Your mind knows this, on some level beneath your conscious awareness, and that's exactly why it panics a little when the noise disappears. It's not afraid of silence itself. It's afraid of what silence lets in. The scramble to fill the gap, the sudden task, the replayed memory, the itch for the phone. These aren't random glitches. They're defenses. They're your mind's fastest available tools for keeping that deeper material from rising any further. The mental equivalent of turning up the volume the second something uncomfortable starts to play underneath. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes everything. The noise you've been living in, the constant scrolling, the background sound, the packed schedule that never leaves a gap, you probably thought of that as just modern life, just the normal texture of being busy. But look at it again, with this in mind. The noise you've been living in wasn't peace. It never was. Peace doesn't require constant maintenance. Peace doesn't collapse the second you turn off a screen. What you had instead was a wall, carefully built, one habit and one distraction at a time, specifically constructed to keep something back. And it worked. For a while. Walls usually do. But walls also take enormous, continuous energy to maintain. And that's part of why so many people feel tired in a way that doesn't match their actual physical exertion. They're not tired from doing too much. They're tired from holding up a wall they didn't even know they were holding. Understanding this changes what it means to sit through those first uncomfortable minutes of silence. You're not failing at stillness. You're standing at the edge of the wall for the first time in years, feeling it creak under the pressure of everything it's been holding back. Of course that feels uncomfortable. Of course your mind reaches for anything to distract itself. It's not weakness. It's the wall doing exactly the job you built it to do, right up until the moment you decide, on purpose, to stop reinforcing it. This is why the discomfort at the start of silence isn't a sign to stop. It's actually closer to a sign that something real is happening. Think about it the way you'd think about a muscle that's been held tense for a long time. When you finally let it relax, there's often a strange, almost painful sensation before the relief sets in, because the muscle has forgotten what relaxed even feels like. The mind works in a similar way. Years of constant stimulation have trained it to associate stillness with a kind of danger. So the first honest attempts at quiet are going to trigger that old alarm system. That doesn't mean the alarm is accurate. It just means it's old, and it hasn't been updated yet. What actually happens if you stay in the quiet room, past the scramble, past the itch to check your phone, is that the alarm eventually quiets down on its own. Not because you fought it, not because you white-knuckled your way through 10 minutes of willpower, but because alarms that don't get fed eventually run out of urgency. The task that felt so pressing a minute ago turns out to not be that pressing. The memory that demanded replaying eventually finishes replaying and lets go. And underneath all of that noise, for the first time in a while, there's something closer to actual stillness. Not a forced calm, but the kind that shows up on its own once the wall stops being defended so hard. This is also why silence tends to feel different the second or third time you try it than it does the first. The first time, your mind treats it like an emergency, throwing everything it has at filling the gap. But every time you sit through it without immediately reaching for the phone, without immediately obeying the manufactured urgency, you're sending a quiet message to that alarm system. This is safe. You can stand down. Nothing bad is happening here. Over time, that message starts to land. The wall doesn't need to be rebuilt as urgently. The scramble gets shorter, the itch gets weaker, and what's left, more and more, is the actual room, actually quiet, with you actually in it, no longer needing to be protected from your own mind. What is actually underneath the noise, behind the noise, isn't nothing. That's the part people get wrong, almost universally, and it's an easy mistake to make, because from the outside, silence looks like an absence, like a room with the lights off, nothing there to see. So the assumption forms naturally, if there's nothing in the quiet, then there's nothing to gain from it either. They assume silence is empty, so they avoid it, the same way you might avoid an empty room out of simple disinterest, not realizing the room isn't empty at all. It's just dark, and they never stayed long enough to let their eyes adjust. What's actually underneath the noise is not nothing. It's the opposite of nothing. It's everything you didn't have time to feel, stacked up, patient, waiting for the moment the noise finally lets up enough for it to be noticed. This is the part that surprises people most, because it doesn't match the story they were told about stillness. They expected boredom. They expected blankness. What they find instead, if they stay long enough, is a kind of emotional backlog, a whole collection of things that got postponed, ignored, or outrun. All of it still there, none of it actually gone, just because it wasn't dealt with. Think about the sadness you postponed, not the big, obvious grief that forces itself on you no matter what. That kind usually gets felt, one way or another, because it's too large to ignore. This is the smaller sadness, the kind that shows up in ordinary moments and gets swallowed because there's no time for it, or because feeling it seems inconvenient, or because you've gotten so used to moving past discomfort quickly that pausing for it doesn't even occur to you anymore. A conversation that hurt more than you let on, a hope that quietly didn't happen and never got mourned, a version of a relationship you thought you'd have that slipped away so gradually you never marked the moment it was gone. All of that gets postponed, again and again, and postponed things don't disappear. They just wait for a quiet enough moment to finally be acknowledged. Think about the decision you avoided. Almost everyone is carrying at least one of these, a choice they know, somewhere underneath, they've already made, but haven't let themselves fully admit, because admitting it means having to act on it. Staying busy is one of the most effective ways to avoid a decision like that, because busy leaves no room for the quiet clarity that would force the truth to the surface. As long as there's noise, the decision can stay comfortably unmade. The second the noise drops, though, it doesn't stay quiet for long. It tends to be one of the very first things that rises, because it's usually been sitting closest to the surface the whole time, just waiting for a gap wide enough to be looked at directly. Think about the version of yourself you buried under deadlines and distraction. This one is harder to name, because it's less a specific thought and more a feeling, a sense of some part of you that got left behind somewhere. Maybe a version of you that had more time for the people you love, or more curiosity, or more softness, or simply more presence. Somewhere along the way, that version got quietly buried under the demands of getting through the day, and most people don't even notice the burial happening. It's not a single event, it's an accumulation, one busy day at a time, until one day you look up and you're not entirely sure where that version of you went. Silence doesn't create any of this. This is worth being precise about, because it's exactly where people get scared and pull back. They think silence is generating the discomfort, manufacturing sadness or doubt out of nowhere, and so they treat it as the enemy, something to be avoided because it makes them feel worse. But silence doesn't create these things. It reveals them. The sadness was already there. The undecided decision was already there. The buried version of you was already there, the whole time, underneath every distraction you used to keep from noticing it. Silence doesn't add weight. It simply removes the noise that was covering the weight that already existed. This distinction changes everything about how you approach it. If silence created the discomfort, avoiding silence would actually make sense as a solution. Stay busy, stay distracted, keep the peace by keeping the noise going. But if silence only reveals what's already there, then avoiding it doesn't make the discomfort disappear. It just keeps it hidden, buried a little deeper each time, growing heavier the longer it's ignored. The noise was never actually solving anything. It was only postponing the moment you'd have to feel what was already true. And this is where the real shift happens, the one worth everything that came before it. The mind that finally gets quiet enough to feel them is the mind that finally gets to heal them. Healing doesn't happen through avoidance. It's never happened that way, for anyone, no matter how much noise they had access to. Healing happens through contact, actually feeling the sadness instead of postponing it again, actually facing the decision instead of staying busy enough to dodge it, actually noticing the version of you that got buried and starting, gently, to dig them back out. None of that is possible while the noise is running. It's only possible once the noise drops low enough for you to hear what's actually been playing underneath it the whole time. This is why the discomfort of sitting with what's under the noise isn't a warning sign to run from. It's closer to the opposite. It's the first real contact you've had with parts of yourself that have been waiting a long time to be noticed. It won't feel comfortable, especially at first, and there's no reason to pretend it will. But comfort was never really the goal. Wholeness was. And wholeness only ever comes from turning toward what's actually there, not from getting better and better at building noise loud enough to keep pretending it isn't. The old practice of doing absolutely nothing. Long before phones, long before noise was even possible on this scale, before there was a screen in every pocket and a notification for every idle second, people already understood this, not as a trend, not as a wellness technique with a name attached to it, but as something closer to common knowledge, the kind of thing a community simply knew, the way people once knew how to read weather or track the seasons without needing it written down anywhere. They understood that a mind, like a body, needed periods of nothing. Not activity disguised as rest, not a different kind of stimulation, actual, deliberate nothing. The instructions, when they existed at all, were almost embarrassingly simple. Sit still, watch the breath. Don't reach for anything, don't fix anything. That's it. No elaborate technique, no complicated ritual, nothing that required special equipment or years of study to begin. Just a body, sitting, and a mind, allowed to be exactly as loud or as quiet as it happened to be in that moment, without judgment, without trying to force it into some idealized version of peace. The goal was never to silence the mind through effort. Effort, in fact, tends to work against it, because effort is just another form of reaching, another way of doing something instead of doing nothing. The idea was to just let the mind exhaust its own noise, the way a storm exhausts itself, if you don't feed it more wind. This image is worth sitting with, because it explains something that willpower alone never manages to explain. A storm doesn't need to be fought to end. It doesn't need you to push against it or wrestle it into submission. It runs its course, using up its own energy, and eventually it settles on its own, always, without exception, as long as nothing keeps feeding it more force. The mind works the same way, left alone, without new input, without new distraction, thrown at it every time it gets restless. Its own noise eventually burns through its available energy and quiets down, not because you defeated it, but because that's simply what unfed storms do. This wasn't mysticism, even though it can sound that way to modern ears, wrapped as it often is in imagery of monks and mountains and incense. Strip all of that away, and what's left is something almost mechanical in its simplicity. It was maintenance, the same way you'd let a field lie empty for a season so it could become fertile again. Anyone who has ever grown anything understands this instinctively. A field that's planted, harvested, and immediately planted again, season after season, with no rest, eventually stops producing the way it used to. The soil gets thin, the yield drops, not because the field stopped trying, but because nothing gets replenished if it's never given the chance to simply lie there, untouched, doing nothing that looks like productivity from the outside. Your mind is not so different from that field. Every day, it's planted with new information, new demands, new stimulation, harvested constantly for decisions and reactions and output, and rarely, if ever, given a season of doing nothing at all. There's no equivalent, in most modern lives, of letting the field lie fallow. Every gap gets filled. Every quiet moment gets planted with something new before it has the chance to actually rest. And the result, over time, mirrors exactly what happens to overworked soil. The mind's yield thins out. Creativity narrows. Patience shortens. The depth that used to be available starts to feel harder to reach, not because it's gone, but because it hasn't had the conditions it needs to replenish. Your mind needs its empty seasons too, and you've been denying it one for years, probably without ever consciously choosing to. Nobody wakes up and decides, "Today I will give my mind no rest at all." It happens by default, by the slow accumulation of habits that each seem harmless on their own. One more scroll, one more show playing in the background, one more podcast to make a quiet drive feel productive. None of these choices look like harm in the moment, but stacked together, day after day, year after year, they add up to exactly what the old practice was trying to prevent. A mind that never gets its fallow season, that's asked to keep producing without ever being allowed to simply lie still and recover. What makes the old practice so quietly radical, even now, is how little it asks of you. It doesn't ask you to add anything to your life. It doesn't require a new skill, a subscription, a device, a course. It asks you to do less, to sit, to breathe, to stop reaching, to stop fixing, and to trust that the mind, like the storm, like the field, knows how to settle and replenish on its own if you simply stop interfering with the process. That trust is actually the hardest part, harder than the sitting itself, because everything about modern life has trained you to believe that stillness is wasted time, that nothing good comes from doing nothing. But the people who understood this practice long before any of today's noise existed weren't naive about how minds work. They watched closely, over long periods of time, and they noticed the same pattern you can notice today if you're willing to sit long enough to see it. That a mind given true, uninterrupted, undemanding space eventually stops thrashing and starts to settle, on its own, without needing to be forced. Not because the practice is magic, but because it simply removes the obstacles that keep the mind's natural tendency toward rest from ever getting a chance to show itself. The nothing was never empty. It was the one condition the mind actually needed all along, and it's still exactly what your mind is asking for now, underneath everything else you've been giving it instead. Why you keep reaching for your phone in the quiet. It's not that you love your phone. Say that out loud to yourself for a second, because it matters more than it sounds like it does. You don't reach for it because it brings you joy. Not really. Not in the deep sense of the word. Most of the time you can't even remember what you looked at 30 seconds after you looked at it. There's no real satisfaction in most of those glances, no lingering warmth, no sense of having gained something, and yet the hand still moves, the thumb still unlocks the screen. It happens faster than thought, faster than choice, which tells you something important right away. This was never really about the phone. The phone is just the nearest tool. What's actually driving the reach is something underneath, something learned, something your subconscious picked up on its own, without asking your permission. Here's what it learned, over years of repetition, so quietly you never noticed the lesson being taught. It's that silence equals discomfort, and discomfort equals danger, and danger equals reach for the exit. That chain sounds dramatic when it's written out plainly like that, but it's not dramatic at all in how it actually operates. It happens in fractions of a second, below the level of conscious thought, the same way you'd flinch away from a hot stove before you'd even finished registering the word hot. Your subconscious doesn't wait for you to reason through whether silence is actually dangerous. It just reacts, the way any well-trained system reacts, fast and automatic. because that's the whole point of training something in the first place, to skip the slow thinking and go straight to the response. And this particular training didn't happen on purpose. Nobody sat you down and taught you that quiet moments were unsafe. It happened the way most deep conditioning happens, through sheer repetition, thousands of tiny moments stacked on top of each other until the pattern became automatic. Every time a quiet moment showed up in your life, waiting for something, a pause in conversation, an empty stretch of evening, and you filled it instantly with your phone, you weren't just passing the time, you were casting a vote. You were telling your nervous system, this is what we do when things go quiet. We reach, we fill, we don't sit in it. One vote doesn't mean much, but thousands of votes, repeated daily for years, don't just suggest a preference, they build a rule. And once a rule like that gets built deeply enough, it stops feeling like a choice at all. It starts to feel like instinct. This is exactly why it feels involuntary now. It's not that you're weak-willed or lacking discipline, which is the story a lot of people tell themselves when they notice how automatic the reach has become. It's that the pattern has been rehearsed so many times, it's no longer a decision your conscious mind is even involved in making. By the time you notice you're holding the phone, the choice already happened somewhere beneath your awareness, the way a hand pulls back from heat before the brain has even finished processing pain. You're not failing to resist an urge. You're watching a well-practiced reflex fire exactly the way it was trained to fire. And here's the part that makes it self-reinforcing, the part that explains why it doesn't just stay the same over time, but actually gets stronger the longer it goes unchecked. Every time you grab your phone, the second things go quiet, you're confirming that lesson a little deeper. You're not neutral in that moment. You're not just passing time harmlessly. You're actively teaching your subconscious, one more time, that this reflex was correct. That yes, silence really was something to escape. That yes, reaching for the exit really was the right move. That yes, this pattern deserves to keep running exactly the way it's been running. Nothing about that repetition weakens the pattern. If anything, every repetition sharpens it, the way any skill sharpens with practice. Except, this is a skill you never actually meant to build. This is worth understanding clearly, because it removes the shame from the equation, and shame has never once helped anyone change a pattern like this. You didn't choose this reflex any more than you'd choose to flinch from fire. It was built the same way any reflex gets built, through repetition, without your conscious consent, shaped by an environment that made the exit endlessly available every single time discomfort even slightly rose. Blaming yourself for having a well-trained nervous system is like blaming a muscle for the exact way you trained it to move. The muscle isn't wrong, it's just doing what it was taught, faithfully, exactly as instructed. But here's where it actually starts to shift, and it's simpler than most people expect, even though it doesn't feel simple in the moment it's happening. Every time you resist, just for a few seconds longer than you're comfortable with, you're teaching your subconscious something new. Not through force, not through some dramatic act of willpower that has to be summoned from nowhere. Just through a few extra seconds, held on purpose, in the exact moment the reflex fires and tells you to reach. Those few seconds matter more than they seem like they should, because they're doing the exact opposite of what thousands of previous repetitions did. Instead of confirming the old lesson, they start to interrupt it. They introduce a tiny piece of new evidence into a system that's been collecting the same evidence for years without contradiction. And a system built entirely on repetition is exactly the kind of system that responds, eventually, to a new repetition, even a small one, even an imperfect one, as long as it happens consistently enough to register as a pattern rather than a fluke. What those few seconds are actually teaching, underneath the surface, is something your subconscious has apparently forgotten, but never actually lost the capacity to understand that silence isn't a threat, that it's safe to stay here, that nothing bad happens when the noise stops. This isn't a philosophical idea you have to convince yourself of intellectually. It's not something you talk your way into believing. It's something your nervous system has to experience directly, over and over, small doses at a time, the exact same way it learned the opposite lesson in the first place. You don't out-argue a reflex, you out-repeat it. This is why the goal was never to eliminate the urge entirely, especially not right away. That's not a realistic first step, and expecting it of yourself just sets up another cycle of failure and self-blame that doesn't actually help. The goal is smaller and much more achievable than it looks. Just a few seconds of staying, right at the exact moment the reach usually happens automatically. Let the itch rise. Notice it. Don't obey it immediately. Let a few uncomfortable seconds pass, more than you're used to allowing, and then, if you want to, you can still check the phone. Nobody's asking for permanent restraint on day one. What matters is simply that the automatic reflex didn't get to fire completely unchallenged this time. Do that enough times, and something starts to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but the way any retraining happens. Quietly, cumulatively, almost invisible, until you notice, one day, that the itch isn't quite as sharp as it used to be. That a quiet moment doesn't spike the same urgency it once did. That your hand doesn't move toward the phone quite as automatically, because the lesson underneath it has slowly started to update. Silence used to mean danger. Now, a little more each time, it starts to mean something closer to safety, simply because you kept showing up, again and again, proving it in small, unglamorous doses your subconscious eventually had no choice but to believe. Rebuilding your tolerance for stillness. You don't fix an overstimulated mind by forcing yourself into an hour of meditation. You'll quit by day 3. This is where most people go wrong when they finally decide something needs to change. They hear about the benefits of stillness. They feel the weight of everything they've been avoiding, and they respond the way most people respond to any problem they suddenly take seriously. They overcorrect. They decide tomorrow morning they'll sit for a full hour in complete silence. No phone, no distractions, total discipline from the very first attempt. And for a day or two, maybe, it works, fueled entirely by motivation and the novelty of trying something new. But motivation is a poor foundation for anything that requires repetition. And by day 3, the hour feels unbearable, the mind rebels harder than expected, and the whole attempt gets abandoned, often with a quiet internal verdict that stillness just isn't for them. This isn't a failure of character. It's a failure of approach, asking an overstimulated mind, one that's been trained for years on constant input, to suddenly sit through an hour of nothing is roughly the same as asking someone who hasn't exercised in a decade to run a marathon because they finally decided to get in shape. The ambition is admirable. The execution ignores everything about how change actually works in a body, or a mind, that's been shaped a certain way for a long time. Nothing that's been trained for years gets untrained in a single sitting, no matter how much willpower is thrown at it. You fix it the way you'd rebuild any strength, slowly, and with patience for how weak it's become. This comparison is worth taking seriously, not just as a nice metaphor, but as an actual instruction for how to approach this. Nobody expects a muscle that hasn't been used in years to lift its old maximum weight on the first day back. Everyone understands, almost instinctively, that strength has to be rebuilt in small increments, with patience for the fact that the current capacity is nowhere near where it used to be, or where it eventually could be again. Somehow, this obvious wisdom gets abandoned the moment the conversation shifts from muscles to minds. People expect their tolerance for stillness to just show up fully formed the first time they ask for it, and when it doesn't, they assume something is wrong with them instead of recognizing that they're simply asking an untrained capacity to perform like a trained one. So the actual starting point is much smaller than most people expect, almost embarrassingly small, if you're comparing it to the grand, hour-long meditation sessions people imagine when they picture fixing their mind. A few minutes of no input. That's the whole beginning. No phone, no sound, no task. Just you, sitting, or standing, or lying down, for a few minutes, with nothing coming in and nothing being asked of you. Not an hour, not even 30 minutes. A few minutes, maybe even just 2 or 3 at the very start. Enough to be uncomfortable, but not so much that it becomes unbearable and gets abandoned before it has the chance to do anything. Then a few more the next day. This is the part that actually makes the difference, far more than the length of any single session. It's not about how long you can sit still today. It's about showing up again tomorrow, and the day after that, and slowly extending the window, not because you're forcing it, but because the mind, like any muscle, actually starts to build capacity when it's given consistent, repeated, gradually increasing exposure to the thing it used to find intolerable. 2 minutes becomes 3, 3 becomes 5, 5 becomes 10, not through a single act of heroic willpower, but through the quiet accumulation of showing up again and again, at a pace the mind can actually keep up with, instead of one that guarantees eventual burnout. Here's something worth understanding clearly, because it changes what you're actually aiming for in these sessions. You're not trying to think your way to peace. This is a common misunderstanding, the idea that sitting in stillness means using that time to solve problems, work through decisions, or reason your way into feeling calm. That's not rest, that's just thinking, with the lights dimmed, still work, still effort, still your mind being asked to produce something. Real stillness isn't about using the quiet productively. It's not another task disguised as rest. The whole point is the absence of a point, no goal to reach, no insight required, no problem that needs solving during those few minutes. If thoughts arrive, they arrive. If insights come, they come. But none of that is the objective. The objective is simply the not doing itself. You're trying to let the mind remember what it feels like to not be asked for anything at all. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes the entire practice away from effort and towards something closer to permission. You're not training your mind to perform stillness the way you'd train it to perform a new skill. You're removing demands, one small window at a time, and simply waiting to see what the mind does when nothing is required of it. That's a completely different orientation than trying to force calm into existence through sheer discipline. It's less like pushing a boulder uphill, and more like finally setting something down that's been carried for a very long time, and just noticing what it feels like for the hands to be empty. That memory is still in there. This matters more than it might seem to on the surface, because it's easy to believe, especially after years of constant stimulation, that the capacity for stillness has been permanently lost, worn away completely, gone the way a skill disappears after decades of not using it. But that's not accurate. Every person, before any of this noise existed in their life, once knew exactly what it felt like to sit in quiet without needing anything to fill it. Children do this naturally, before they're taught otherwise, staring at nothing, perfectly content, asking for nothing from the moment. That capacity doesn't get deleted by years of distraction. It gets buried, the way anything unused gets buried. But buried isn't the same as gone. It hasn't disappeared. It's just been quiet for a long time, waiting for you to go looking for it. This is the part worth holding on to whenever the process feels frustratingly slow, whenever the itch to reach for stimulation still shows up stronger than you'd like. whenever it feels like nothing is changing despite the effort. Rebuilding tolerance for stillness isn't about creating something new from nothing. It's about clearing a path back to something that was already there all along, something that's been sitting quietly beneath years of noise, patient in a way you probably haven't given yourself credit for being. It doesn't need to be forced back into existence. It just needs the noise to lower gradually enough, consistently enough, for long enough, that it finally has room to be noticed again. Not conjured, not manufactured, simply remembered, the way anything familiar comes back once you finally stop drowning it out. Here's the quiet thunder in all of this. You have spent your whole life thinking silence is what you'll get once everything else is handled, once the to-do list is empty, once the stress is over, once life finally slows down on its own. But it never will, because the noise isn't coming from your life. It's coming from a mind that forgot how to stop. Silence was never the reward waiting at the end. It was the doorway you kept walking past. So this is where it all comes back around. You've never heard true silence, not because it isn't available, but because you've never given your mind permission to stop performing long enough to find it. Your subconscious isn't asking for a better routine or a smarter plan. It's asking for space, a few minutes where nothing is required of it. That's not a small ask, but it might be the only one that actually matters. The rest you've been chasing was never out there in a better schedule or a longer vacation. It was always underneath the noise, waiting for you to finally get quiet enough to hear it. If this spoke to something in you, subscribe, because there's more of this waiting for the part of you that's ready to slow down.